This computer. Yeah, we're recording this pre-show here, and we're looking at Dennis's article. And so you're saying where do I need to put Stour?
Stowers will go in after the Cincinnati guy, Endress.
Cincinnati.
So it
So
goes right in after that and
so
above
what's
Dell.
his team?
Philadelphia.
Philly. Ah, Goddard.
So
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So Eli Stowers, and I don't know why he dropped off because he was in there, and then I must have done something wrong when I cut and pasted to the article, and he
Mm-hmm.
ended up missing O W
Stowers.
E R S.
Yeah, and he's a zero.
He is a zero, but I'll
Okay.
explain why he's above the other guys.
Yeah.
So,
So
so San Francisco or Philadelphia has Dallas Goddard still on contract.
right.
Okay, so and Dallas Goddard had a really strong score last year. He was a 47 basically in MVP,
Mm-hmm.
and I used 40 as the cutoff for the tight ends as far as the base number that I use to calculate. That's tight end 10 level,
Mm-hmm.
and that is very similar to what I do for the other positions. I look at basically the last starter
Mm-hmm.
um, for running back and wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
We know that 80 is the magic number. Anybody below an MVP of 80 has had everybody who's been replaced at running back
So when you say
has
80, would that mean if your opportunity index ever got to 80, that would be a slam dunk that this
80 would
is?
be a perfect score, correct? 80 would be
So,
a perfect score, and for tight end 40 would be a perfect score.
okay,
So
so opportunity index 40 is a perfect score.
for tight end, for tight end it would be.
So I can put 40 is 100%, right?
That's correct. That is correct. That's a good
Yeah,
way to
so
look at it.
I need to add that information because in some ways then I would you know calculate 28 divided by 40 is the probability.
That's a good way to look at it
You see
for
what I'm
here, yeah. So a 70% is his possibility of being, in my opinion,
yeah, well that's
you
what I'm
know,
trying to
that
gauge in
impact
your
guy.
opinion. I mean
Yes,
that's,
yes.
so
Yeah,
I'm
because
gonna need
I've
a little, yeah, so I need that information. Yeah, 70%. So I need that information because I want to put uh, uh, that down here. So
yeah,
I want people to be aware of that.
yeah, and here's how it's calculated is I put the percentage of okay, how confident am I that this player is going to reach a minimum starting tight end level.
Mhm.
Okay, in the case of
And this
Sneak,
is this gut concept that I did an article. It's on the site for us, but we're now using your opportunity index is kind of in that same process is for us to get a probability. So now we'll have something to test. I mean, that's for people listening. That's what we're trying to do is get metrics, and we're trying to metricize Dennis's opinion. I mean, I don't know if he's not sure that's a word, but we just invented it. So I think that's a good idea, Dennis, because if you're the tight end whisperer, after about 3 years of you doing this, we're going to have some data. Like, for
yes,
instance, if Oscar Depp, you know, makes it to tight end one and none of these others do, then that says, Dennis is a little weak here this year. you know.
Yeah,
So
and
we just
here's
need to
yeah.
track your success so that we can, if we want to build a model that includes this, we're going to have this information and the success rate of your opinion. That's part of it, is for us to put a factor, a weighting factor, which, we understand the weighting factor of your opinion. We want to try to take that in something beyond that. So that's folks, that's what we're trying to do, is build, but you need a few years. I mean, this is, what is this, eight or so samples, eight. So, it would be nice to have 20 or 30 for us to calculate here.
Yeah, and in this case, and in fantasy football, uh, yes, it's important to grade the results, but it's important to grade those results in context with what happened that season. So if Oscar Delp goes on to be a starting tight end
Mhm,
this year in fantasy football, and by that I mean he's 12th or better at the tight end position using our consistency metrics,
mhm.
and nothing happened to Juwan Johnson, then that's a horrible forecast. Okay.
Yes,
But if Jawan Johnson
he
goes
gets
down with an
hurt.
injury, the
Right.
fact that Delp was one of the only 8 guys that made this list, and yes, I've got him at a 0, but he's on the list. There's only 8 guys out of 32 starters in the NFL, and there's only 8 guys that made the list as rookies. That's pretty impressive. But the chances that he can outdo Juwan Johnson without a Juwan Johnson injury is basically nil, in my opinion. It's not likely to happen, and the reason is simple. It's that Juwan Johnson has been a very good tight end. It's not that Oscar Delp is a bad tight end.
Mhm.
And I think Oscar Delp as a rookie will get some reps, and
And,
he will
and,
probably score
and
a couple of touchdowns.
Eli Reardon
Eli
is
Reardon's
one.
another guy. New England likes to use 2 tight ends
So
again.
let me ask you this then. If you're talking about New England and you just said two tight ends, he has double the chance of an injury helping him versus
Well,
Delp.
he's, I will, well, both of these
You see
guys,
what I'm thinking is,
correct. In
if New Orleans doesn't use two tight ends a lot, New England does, then an injury for either of the guy could move him up.
Yeah, and the Saints do use 2 tight ends quite a bit
Oh,
as well.
okay, okay.
But but again, the Patriots do it more, and the Patriots, let Austin
So
Hooper
as a
go.
zero, you see what I'm saying? I'm almost
Correct. So,
if my thinking, Dennis, maybe he should be a one or something.
well,
You see
again,
what I'm trying to
abs-
tease out a little bit,
ab-
Dennis.
absolutely, and
And
I
folks, this is in graduate school, and when I treat my graduate students, is the Socratic method of asking questions and trying to define the landscape. And so I'm pushing Dennis a little bit to make him, see what he's doing. Not necessarily I disagree with anything here. It's just I want to tease it out a little bit, because that's, if you're going to have somebody to help you, and we've talked about that concept of trying to find multiple people to build a think tank for fantasy football. You need to tease them out a little bit. Just kind of define where's the boundaries of his opinion. And so we're getting to that, Dennis, by me questioning. So that was the whole point of the, not that
no, no,
I'm
very, very, very.
skeptical of anything you're doing. Not at all. I'm just trying to define a little bit more where you're thinking about him and Max Clare, because and Stowers. I mean, we've got these 4-0 guys But as we know, if an injury hits Philadelphia, New England, New Orleans, or the Rams, any one of these guys could be a Tongass kind of play, that
Correct.
we may be streaming them
Correct.
in over the end of the season kind of thing.
That is correct. And I would say for the record here,
Mhm.
if let's say that New England, we had an injury to their top tight end,
Right.
Hunter Henry
Hunter
goes
Henry.
down.
Yeah.
The Reardon
Mhm.
then is more likely to be a contributor. In fact, I would say his opportunity index would jump to 24. And
And
in
I'm just
Delp's
wondering,
case,
should we put an injury multiplier or something down the road, Dennis?
yeah, and this is the reason why these guys made the list and others didn't,
Ah,
is because there is that potential for
but I don't
injury.
see in your writing,
No,
don't
I should
define that.
explain that better.
Maybe up here
In
at the top where you're doing
yeah, I probably
MVP
should
and injury, you might
yep.
define under injury index opportunity injury multiplier or something.
Yeah, and that might be something that we
The
evolve
next,
to.
yeah,
And that's actually something that we could evolve to this year in this
if you want.
iteration of the article,
Mhm.
because I do think that that's an important way to look at stuff is with or without an injury, certain guys will have a higher opportunity. For instance, Sadiq doesn't need an injury to be where he is. And
Mhm.
that's why he's my favorite tight end.
Mhm.
Yes, Mason Taylor is a good, solid tight end,
Mhm.
but he hasn't produced at a 40 or above on the MVP index yet.
Mhm.
So what that tells me is he's good in NFL terms, but in fantasy football terms, he's not the guy. And Sadiq was not drafted as early as he was drafted in the first round to just be an injury replacement. They
Right.
were figuring this is an improvement on what they have.
Right.
And in the case of Jolly with Denver,
Mhm.
he's just in that sort of realm where Evan Ingram did not have what I would consider a full season of play last year.
Mhm.
So the opportunity is wide open for somebody to take that spot because Ingram did not live up to his usual billing. And Troutman was a minus 69
Mhm.
as the second tight end. So Troutman to me is not the guy. He's not the pass catching type of tight end you want in fantasy football. He'll continue to be playing for probably another 5, 6, maybe 10 years
Right.
in the league because he's very good at what he does. But what he does is not something that's great for fantasy football week in and week out.
Right.
You'll see the occasional touchdown from him, the occasional week where he has some points, but he is not going to be the guy week in, week out that you want as a fantasy football
And it
starter.
just hits me, Dennis, that the information you just laid down, for me, when we discuss some picks, I don't have that information. You were just describing the landscape of the jet. I mean, folks, are you hearing the depth here that Dennis can lay down? It's in this little old hardhead noggin that he's got this stuff, but it's his partner here needs to for me to question and bring that forth in our frothy discussion. I'm not, I don't have that fingertip knowledge, Dennis. Do you realize that the average fantasy football pundit
Oh yeah. Yeah.
doesn't have that?
No. No.
That's why you're just having that knowledge. you're able to spring forward if something were to happen, in the season. That's why you could jump to the waiver wire. And it's like, man, are you anticipating something?
Yes.
You've got that landscape thinking, and maybe that's the title of something, landscape thinking, Dennis. Let's I
And
wonder if we can
this is
ask
actually
Brock
some,
about. Yeah,
yeah,
go
and
ahead.
that's actually something that you helped me develop even further. I've always looked at this this game of fantasy football sort of from the top down, looking at the team view
Yeah.
and then the player view. But until you really started showing me why that is so effective, it's accelerated it, because for me, I would look at, the second wide receiver on a roster, but now I'm looking at, when I put my data together and my forecasts for the season together, if you look at Atlanta, for instance, I've got 4 running backs that I give a grade to. I've got 3 tight ends right now, and I've got 5 wide receivers. Does that mean that I expect them all to be viable in fantasy football, even the deepest best ball leagues? Of course not.
No.
But I understand what the pecking order might be. And again, notice I said might be.
Right.
I am not proclaiming that I have an expert view of who should be above who in the depth charts. But remember back to last year with the Chargers, Najee Harris goes down. Everybody is going after
Haskins.
Haskins. I'm telling you, Vidal. And that was a case of understanding a roster.
That helps me collect a few shekels in my bankroll there, Dennis. Thanks for
Yeah.
that.
So,
Because I was able to get Vitale in like
oh, yeah.
35 of 40
Yeah.
leagues. It was
Oh, yeah.
insane
Yep.
that everybody was going one way and I was collecting almost for cheap, like $10 or something,
Oh,
a dollar. It was
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. We got him a week before we needed him, because then the
Yes.
next week Hampton goes down.
Yes.
And when Hampton went down, people were still looking at Haskins over
Yes.
Vidal, and we
But
weren't.
I think there was a movement. In other
Yes.
words, the window of cheapness for Vidal had left at that
Oh,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally left the building. And then, you had to
You're going to
you
put
had to
up some
duel.
money to get, yeah.
And as I told you at the time, I'm thinking this is a 70-30 bet. I'm thinking 70% likelihood that it's Vidal over Haskins. And the rest of the world was more of an 80-20
Yeah.
on Haskins.
Haskins
So
Vidal.
we were completely flipped on our probabilities. And but that look, understanding the rosters and looking at these players every week, charting their data, looking at how many snaps they had, how many targets they had, is something that I do every week. So when somebody goes down, I understand where the next guy up mentality is going to be. And that helps me understand how a rookie might be able to work into that structure. For instance, at wide receiver this year, on the rookie wide receivers, Skylar Bell with Buffalo is a very interesting WR2 type, but his actual opportunity index is very low.
It is low.
The
Like,
reason
what
it's
is your perfect opportunity next for WR2?
it, that would be an 80. Well, I'm sorry, for WR2 would be a 60 actually. So you could see Chris Bell and Antonio Williams. And remember, we just took Antonio Williams in a draft last night. That's why, because, you know, 54 out of 60 is a pretty high percentage that he's going to
Yes.
be the
You and
WR2.
I remember we were and I was like, yeah, let's take this guy. When we made that decision, I was thinking, I hadn't even looked at this data. If I'd seen this, Dennis, I wouldn't even thought about it. I've been like, yes, pull the trigger. But in
Yeah,
my head, I was thinking, where's the competition in Washington? The only downside I was worried about last night was just Jaden Daniels,
oh yeah, yeah,
where's he going to lead us this year? Because he likes to run, and we with Lamar Jackson, I always felt like while he was running, we were losing a few
yes,
opportunities with his
yes.
Zay Flowers. And I think this year I'm a little bit higher on Zay Flowers because I think Lamar Jackson, if he, if he wants to stop the slide, he needs to throw a little more. I'm hoping that that will translate to Zay Flowers being even more better for this year. I'm hoping that's the case. But Antonio Williams, the same thing is, I think in Dynasty, that transition, I feel like that's an upward transition in this year, the next. I think by year two, we could really get that bounce up. So I think he's a good
And
investment as well.
so a 54 out of 60 is pretty high.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But what we're forecasting in this case is that he will be successful as a WR2, which a 60 is WR31 level. So we're not talking a guy who's a slam dunk starter at the position.
Right.
He's a good flex. And that's the difference here.
But you
And I'll
need
be,
flexes.
you need flex starters, and 54 out of 60 for a flex starter, that's a solid guy that you want on your roster. That's a 90% likelihood, in my opinion,
Right.
that he could finish in top 30. Now, if you look at stuff and you look at the calculations and all that, not everybody is going to hit their ideal mark. So, could he be a WR2 and finish 35th? Yes. Could he finish 40th? Yes. But I
If
just like his chances of having the upside potential
Mhm.
of being a guy you want on your roster. And I would say anything over 70% of that mark, so 42 or higher,
Mhm.
is a guy that I'll bet on, even in redraft. I'll
So I
bet on him at the
noticed
right price.
Mark Lemon then under that, Dennis, we took him, but it's like
Yes. He's more of a dynasty for the future guy than necessarily hitting it
this year guy.
this year. This year he'll have some good weeks. And depending on where he goes in drafts will determine whether he's worth the gamble or not. But I look at this opportunity index primarily. The first use of this for me are for my dynasty teams. And that's the mentality that I'm looking at. So when I look at Makai Lemon and I see him at a 29 for this year, I'm thinking the JSN factor. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a guy who may not be in the perfect situation to perform from week one, because as a rookie, JSN had a 19 for his MVP index.
Right.
Okay. It was not a guy that you'd want to be starting each and every week. Now he's came on strong at the end of the year, but in redraft, that's not a guy that I want on my roster. The next year, he jumped all the way up to an 88. And of course, I was forecasting the jump because he had less competition. And then the last year with no competition for that top spot other than Cooper Kupp and Troy Horton or Torrey Horton, he had a 147 last year. Like that's insanely that was the top of the heap. But Makai Lemon's that kind of a guy where first year maybe he struggles. I've got him at about a 50-50
Mm-hmm.
to be a top 30 guy. But if I'm wrong on Makai Lemon, and again, it comes down to this concept of understanding not only the forecast, but what the alternate forecast for a player is.
Mm-hmm.
His alternate forecast could be like the second coming of Jamar Chase. We don't know. Like
Right.
he's incredibly talented. I don't know what his upside is, but for year one, behind Devonta Smith, probably not looking at the upside of a guy who's going to absolutely take off. And here's the thing: they also have Hollywood Brown and Dontavian Wicks, two veterans on that roster that they might trust a little more than Makai Lemon at the beginning of the year. That's why Makai Lemon is a great dynasty pick, but he's going to have to come cheap in redraft to bet on that upside versus a guy like Antonio Williams. He's more likely to be a factor in year one, but his career arc, I don't think, is going to get a whole lot. His career arc might be WR2, might be the best you can get out of him. So, that's the way I look at that. And just for the record, when I'm looking at a player, I don't do the calculations before I do the predictions. So when I'm doing my opportunity index, there's occasionally a guy who really surprises me on how high he rates. And that's Casey Concepcion this year. Casey Concepcion was a guy coming out of the combine and into the draft that if you asked me, I was like, he's probably the sixth most likely guy at the wide receiver position to be a significant fantasy football producer in year one. And when I say significant, okay, I'm going to even define that because the opportunity index at WR1 is based on an 80, just like it is at running back. And an 80 is basically 22, WR22. So I'm not saying that Casey Concepcion is going to be a top 10 guy. Could he be? Yeah. If Deshaun Watson actually still knows how to play quarterback after all these years of sitting on the sidelines, maybe he becomes a real significant player. And at quarterback position, the minimum is 80 as well.
Okay, I'm finishing up the article here, Dennis, while we're doing pre-show here. Good
And
stuff.
an 80 at quarterback, just to let you know, is a top 11 guy. It's QB 11 most seasons. So I'm
So
saying that,
Mendoza has a 50% chance of being a QB1 this
yeah,
year.
yeah,
Yeah.
so his his likelihood of hitting, that QB 11 spot
Hmm.
is less than 100%. He
Right.
could start on the bench. He could come in. Again, I'm looking at guys when I'm forecasting.
Right.
Okay, I'm not forecasting total points. I am not forecasting even fantasy points per game.
Right.
What I'm forecasting is an upside consistency metric that I call MVP.
Right.
And I know that, and I'm only looking for 10 full games
Well,
to make that list. So if he plays 10 full games and he's a 70 in MVP, I've basically nailed that forecast.
gotcha.
Like that's in my mind, if I hit on a guy at, if I hit on that forecast,
Hmm.
if he ends up with 70, that would be just about a perfect forecast for Mendoza. And
Gotcha.
it's possible he'll be less than that. But
Let,
his opportunity is there now we just got to see if he's got the talent to go with it. But when I did the calculation, I gave him a 70% likelihood that he would start 10 games is and would be actually good enough to get the job done in 10 games. And that's how I used that's how I made the calculation versus Carson Beck. I've got him at a 20 and Drew Aylar, I got him at a 20%. So I'm much more bullish on Mendoza, which is no shock because he was the first player taken in the draft. But I'm not saying he's a 100% guy either. Like, I don't, the rookie class this year at quarterback is very weak. And that's not a shock to anybody. Ty Simpson, if something happened to Stafford, for instance, Ty Simpson would have a pretty high opportunity index. He would probably
Right.
be, he's got to beat out Stenson Bennett. So I'd put that about an 80%.
Hmm.
And so he'd end up with about a score of 64. So, that's where, there's a chance versus Mendoza, who had somebody on the roster ahead of him in Gardner Minshew and I'm sorry, Kirk Cousins, pardon me, that had a high enough MVP index to take down the base value of Mendoza from that 80. So he's got two strikes against him. He's competing with a veteran and he's a rookie. And it's the Raiders. So there's some reasoning behind that percentage, but I'm feeling pretty good about the forecast that he'll have a pretty good season. Not great,
Let's
but a pretty good
uh,
season.
let's hit the stop button on our pre-show. You gave us lots to chew on here. Woo woo. And, and then start, I guess, the real show, or you want to do data lab? I don't care, whichever one. But I'm gonna stop now.